The rifle was heavy in Olivia Connor's hands, but heavier still was the weight of knowing she stood completely alone against men who wanted to take everything she had built. She pressed her back against the wooden frame of her ranch house door, sweat trickling down her temple despite the cool October morning air in 1878, and watched 5 riders approach across the dusty plain of her property just outside Abilene, Texas. Her father had been dead barely 3 months, and already the vultures had come circling, led by Marcus Wainwright, the wealthiest rancher in Taylor County, who had made no secret of his desire to expand his holdings by swallowing up every smaller spread within 50 miles. Olivia was 22 years old, unmarried, and according to every man in Abilene, she had no business trying to run a cattle ranch on her own. The 2 ranch hands her father had employed had quit the day after the funeral, taking jobs with Wainwright before the sun had even set. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and her only brother had been killed at Gettysburg 15 years earlier. There was no one left, just Olivia, 400 acres of Texas grassland, 200 head of cattle, and a stubborn determination that burned hotter than the summer sun. The riders slowed as they neared the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Wainwright sat astride a massive black gelding in the center, his silver hair glinting beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He was a man in his late 50s, thick around the middle but still strong, with cold gray eyes that calculated profit in everything they saw. To his left rode his foreman, a scarred man named Dalton, who was known for settling disputes with his fists or worse. The other 3 were ranch hands, hard men who would follow orders without question if the pay was right. Olivia lifted the rifle higher, settling the stock against her shoulder. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, and she had practiced regularly ever since. She could hit a bottle at 50 yards 9 times out of 10. But shooting bottles and shooting men were entirely different matters, and her hands trembled slightly despite her resolve. "Miss Connor," Wainwright called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I've come to make you a final offer on your property. $5,000, cash money, and you can relocate to San Antonio or Dallas. Start a new life somewhere civilized where a young woman belongs." "My answer is the same as it was last month and the month before that," Olivia called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "This land is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. My father built this ranch from nothing, and I intend to keep it running." Wainwright's expression hardened. "Your father is dead, girl, and you are alone out here. Accidents happen on ranches all the time. Fires, stampedes, all manner of misfortune. I am offering you a way out before something unfortunate occurs." The threat was barely veiled, and Olivia felt her blood run cold even as anger sparked hot in her chest. "Get off my land," she said, her finger moving to rest lightly on the trigger. "I will defend what is mine." Dalton laughed, a harsh sound. "You think pointing that rifle at us is going to change anything? You could not hit the broad side of a barn, and even if you could, there are 5 of us and 1 of you. Be reasonable." Olivia shifted her aim deliberately toward Dalton, sighting down the barrel. "I am being perfectly reasonable. You are trespassing, and I am well within my rights to defend my property. The sheriff may be in your pocket, Wainwright, but even you cannot explain away a bullet hole if I decide to put one in your foreman." For a long moment, silence stretched across the dusty yard. Olivia's heart hammered so hard she could feel it pulsing in her throat, but she kept her hands steady and her gaze fixed. She had no intention of actually pulling the trigger unless forced, but she needed them to believe she would. Wainwright's jaw tightened. "You are making a grave mistake, Miss Connor. I have been patient, but my patience has limits." "Then we understand each other," Olivia said. because so does mine." She held her ground as Wainwright stared at her for several long seconds, his eyes narrowing. Finally, he jerked his head to the side and the 5 riders began to turn their horses. But as they did, Dalton looked back over his shoulder. "You cannot stay awake forever," he said. "And you cannot guard this whole ranch by yourself. We will be seeing you again real soon." They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Olivia waited until they were completely out of sight before she lowered the rifle. Her arms ached from holding it steady, and now that the immediate danger had passed, her whole body began to shake. She sank down onto the porch steps, still clutching the rifle, and drew in several deep breaths to steady herself. She knew Dalton was right. She could not defend the ranch alone, not indefinitely. Wainwright would come back, and next time he might not bother with threats and offers. Next time he might simply act. She needed help, but where could she find it? Every ranch hand in the area knew better than to cross Wainwright. The sheriff was useless, more interested in maintaining his comfortable relationship with the richest man in the county than upholding any real justice. She had no family, no friends with the means or willingness to stand against such a powerful enemy. Olivia stood up slowly, her legs still unsteady, and went back inside the house. It was a modest structure, 4 rooms built solidly by her father's own hands. The furniture was simple but well made, the floors scrubbed clean, the windows curtained with fabric her mother had sewn before Olivia was born. Every inch of this place held memories, held meaning. She would not surrender it without a fight, even if that fight seemed impossible to win. She spent the rest of the day working, because work was the only thing that kept her mind from spinning in circles of fear and doubt. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, repaired a section of fence that had come loose, and checked on the cattle in the near pasture. The animals were healthy, the grass still good despite the autumn season. Everything her father had worked for was thriving, and she would be damned if she let it all fall into Wainwright's greedy hands. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and gold, Olivia returned to the house and prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, then cleaned up and checked that all the windows and doors were secured. She loaded the rifle and set it within easy reach of her bed, then lay down fully clothed, knowing sleep would be difficult to find. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke suddenly to the sound of cattle bellowing in distress. Olivia bolted upright, grabbing the rifle as she swung her legs out of bed. Through the window, she could see an orange glow coming from the direction of the southern pasture. Fire. Her stomach dropped. This was exactly what Wainwright had threatened, and he had wasted no time making good on his warning. Olivia ran outside, her bare feet hitting the dirt as she sprinted toward the glow. As she got closer, she could see that someone had set fire to a section of the fence line, and the dry grass around it was beginning to catch. If it spread to the pasture where most of her cattle were grazing, they could panic and scatter, or worse, be trapped and burned. She had no time to think about who had done this or whether they were still nearby. Olivia ran to the well, hauling up bucket after bucket of water and carrying them to the fire. She threw water on the flames, beating at the burning grass with a wet blanket, working frantically to contain the blaze before it could spread further. Her lungs burned from the smoke, her eyes watered, and her hands blistered from the heat, but she kept working. The fire was small enough that she was able to get it under control after nearly an hour of exhausting effort. By the time the last ember was extinguished, Olivia was covered in soot and ash, her clothes singed, her entire body aching. She stood in the darkness, breathing hard, and fought back tears of frustration and exhaustion. This was only the beginning. Wainwright would not stop. He would send his men back again and again until she broke or until something worse happened. She could rebuild the fence, but she could not be everywhere at once. She could not protect every acre, every animal, every structure on her property while also managing the daily work of running a ranch. Olivia walked slowly back to the house as dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. She washed the soot from her face and hands, bandaged her blistered palms, and changed into clean clothes. Then she saddled her mare, a sturdy roan named Rosie, and rode into Abilene. The town was just beginning to wake as she arrived, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops and the smell of coffee drifting from the hotel dining room. Olivia tied Rosie outside the general store and went inside, purchasing supplies she needed, including more ammunition for the rifle. The store owner, an older man named Mr. Peterson, gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. Everyone in town knew about her situation, but sympathy was as far as most people were willing to go. As Olivia was loading her purchases into the saddlebags, she heard the sound of hooves and turned to see a lone rider coming down the main street. He sat tall in the saddle atop a buckskin horse, his silhouette framed against the morning sun. As he drew closer, Olivia could make out more details. He was a man in his mid-20s, lean and strong, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath the brim of his hat. He wore dusty trail clothes, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. The stranger dismounted in front of the saloon, which would not open for hours yet, and glanced around the street. His gaze passed over Olivia, then returned, and for a moment their eyes met. He had striking green eyes, unusual and clear, and there was something in his expression that was both cautious and kind. He touched the brim of his hat in a polite greeting, and Olivia found herself nodding in return before she could think better of it. She finished loading her supplies and was about to mount up when she heard raised voices from down the street. Turning, she saw Wainwright's foreman Dalton and two of his men approaching the stranger, who had tied his horse and was starting to walk toward the hotel. "You there," Dalton called out. "You looking for work?" The stranger stopped and turned, his expression neutral. "Depends on the work," he said. His voice was deep and calm with a slight accent Olivia could not quite place. "Wainwright Ranch is hiring. Always looking for good men who know how to handle cattle and can follow orders. Pay is fair and regular." The stranger considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "Appreciate the offer, but I am just passing through, not looking to settle in anywhere permanent." Dalton's expression darkened. "That is unfortunate. Mr. Wainwright does not take kindly to men who turn down his hospitality. This is his town, and it is generally healthier to be on his good side than his bad." "I will keep that in mind," the stranger said mildly, "but my answer stands. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to see about getting some breakfast." He started to turn away, but Dalton stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "I do not think you understand how things work around here, friend. When Mr. Wainwright makes an offer, it is considered rude to refuse." The stranger looked down at the hand on his arm, then back up at Dalton. "Let go," he said quietly. "Or what?" What happened next occurred so quickly that Olivia almost missed it. The stranger moved with sudden speed, twisting out of Dalton's grip and simultaneously hooking his foot behind the foreman's ankle. Dalton went down hard on his back in the dirt, and before the other two men could react, the stranger had stepped back and his hand was resting casually on the butt of his revolver. "I did not come here looking for trouble," the stranger said, his voice still calm but now edged with steel. "But I do not take kindly to being grabbed. Now, I am going to go have my breakfast and you fellows are going to leave me be. Does that sound agreeable?" Dalton climbed slowly to his feet, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "You just made a big mistake, mister. Nobody crosses Wainwright's men and stays in this town." "Then it is a good thing I am just passing through," the stranger said. He turned and walked toward the hotel without looking back, though Olivia noticed his hand never left his gun until he was through the door. Dalton and his men stood in the street, muttering among themselves, then finally walked off toward the saloon. Olivia finished securing her saddlebags, her mind racing. The stranger had stood up to Dalton without hesitation, something almost no one in Abilene would dare to do. He was clearly capable of taking care of himself, and he had said he was just passing through, which meant he had no ties to Wainwright or anyone else in town. An idea began to form in Olivia's mind. It was bold, perhaps even foolish, but she was running out of options. She needed help, and this stranger might be her only chance. She tied Rosie back up and walked into the hotel. The lobby was small and plainly furnished, with a desk where the clerk was sorting through papers. Beyond that was the entrance to the dining room, and Olivia could see the stranger sitting alone at a table near the window. He had removed his hat, and in the morning light she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26. His features were strong but not harsh, and there was something about the set of his shoulders that suggested both confidence and wariness. Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage, and walked into the dining room. The stranger looked up as she approached, his green eyes curious. "Pardon me," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I could not help but notice what happened outside. You handled yourself well." He studied her for a moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Care to sit down, miss?" Olivia sat, acutely aware of how she must look with her singed clothes and the smell of smoke still clinging to her hair. "My name is Olivia Connor. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Austin Keller," the stranger said, extending his hand. Olivia shook it, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Connor. I will be direct, Mr. Keller, because I do not have time for anything else. The man you knocked down out there works for Marcus Wainwright, who is trying to force me off my land. Last night someone set fire to my fence line, and I barely managed to put it out before it spread. I am alone out there, and I cannot defend the ranch by myself. I need help, and I am prepared to offer you employment if you are interested." Austin leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That is quite an offer to make to a complete stranger. You do not know anything about me. I know you stood up to Dalton, which is more than most men in this town would do. I know you are not afraid of Wainwright, which means you either have no sense of self-preservation or you have confidence in your abilities. And I know you said you were just passing through, which means you have no loyalties here. That is enough for me. What exactly would this job entail?" "Help me defend my land. Help me keep my cattle safe and my ranch running. In return, I can offer you room and board, 3 meals a day, and whatever wages I can afford. It will not be much, but it is honest work." Austin was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Olivia met his gaze steadily, willing him to see her desperation but also her determination. Finally, he spoke. "Why are you fighting so hard for this land? No offense intended, Miss Connor, but most women in your situation would have taken Wainwright's money and moved somewhere safer." "This ranch is all I have left of my family," Olivia said simply. "My father built it with his own hands. My mother is buried on that land. My brother's name is carved into the porch beam, put there by my father the day he left to fight in the war. Every fence post, every board in that house, every acre of that property represents years of hard work and sacrifice. I will not give it up just because some greedy man with more money than decency thinks he can take it from me. I would rather go down fighting." Something shifted in Austin's expression, a softening around his eyes. "That is a brave way to think. Foolish maybe, but brave. Does that mean you will help me?" Austin picked up his coffee cup, took a long drink, then set it down and looked at her directly. "I will make you a deal, Miss Connor. I will ride out to your ranch and take a look at the situation. If I think there is a fighting chance of keeping Wainwright and his men at bay, I will stay and help you. But if I think the odds are too long and you are just going to get yourself killed, I am going to try my best to convince you to take his money and leave." Fair enough. It was not quite the answer Olivia had hoped for, but it was better than nothing. "Fair enough," she agreed. They finished breakfast quickly, and Austin settled his bill with the hotel clerk. Outside, he untied his buckskin gelding, a sturdy animal with intelligent eyes, and they rode out of Abilene together. Olivia led the way across the open grassland, following the familiar trail to her property. As they rode, Austin asked questions about the ranch, about her father's operation, about the water sources and the quality of the grazing land. Olivia answered as best she could, pointing out landmarks and boundaries. She could feel him assessing everything with a practiced eye, calculating, measuring, judging. When they finally reached the ranch house, Austin dismounted and walked slowly around the property. He examined the burned fence line, checked the structures, and studied the surrounding terrain. Olivia watched him work, her nerves stretched tight. Everything depended on what he decided in the next few minutes. Finally, Austin walked back to where she stood waiting. "You have good land here," he said. "Your father knew what he was doing when he chose this location. The house is solid, the grazing is quality, and you have plenty of water. Defensively, it is not ideal because the approach is too open, but it is not impossible either. So you will stay?" Austin looked at her for a long moment. "I will stay," he said finally. "But I need you to understand something, Miss Connor. This is not going to be easy, and there is a real chance we could fail. Wainwright has money, men, and influence. We have courage and stubbornness, which counts for something, but it might not be enough. If things get too dangerous, I want your word that you will consider leaving, at least temporarily, until we can figure out a better solution." "You have my word that I will consider it," Olivia said carefully, "but I am not making any promises beyond that." A small smile tugged at the corner of Austin's mouth. "I suppose that will have to do. All right then, show me where I can stable my horse, and let us start figuring out how to make this place more defensible." Over the next several days, Olivia and Austin worked from dawn until dark fortifying the ranch. Austin proved to be as capable as Olivia had hoped, with knowledge and skills that spoke of years of experience. He rebuilt the burned fence section with stronger posts and rails, dug a fire break around the perimeter of the house and barn, and set up a system of bells and tripwires that would alert them if anyone approached in the dark. They fell into an easy working rhythm, and Olivia found herself grateful not just for Austin's help but for his company. After months of being completely alone, it was a relief to have someone to talk to, someone who listened when she spoke and offered opinions without condescension. Austin treated her as an equal partner in defending the ranch, asking her input on decisions and respecting her knowledge of the property and cattle. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and talk. Austin told her about his past, how he had grown up on a ranch in Colorado, learned to work cattle and horses from his father, and spent the last few years drifting from place to place after his parents died in a winter fever epidemic. He had no other family, no permanent ties, and admitted he had been starting to wonder if he would spend his whole life wandering. Olivia shared her own history, The pain of losing her brother and then her father, the loneliness of the past months, and her fierce determination to hold onto the only home she had ever known. Austin listened without judgment, his green eyes thoughtful in the lamplight. "You remind me of my mother," he said one evening. "She was small like you, but tough as iron when she needed to be. My father used to say she could face down a grizzly bear with nothing but a stern look." Olivia laughed. "I am not sure I could manage a grizzly, but I appreciate the comparison." "I mean it," Austin said seriously. "What you are doing here, standing up to Wainwright when everyone else is too afraid, that takes real courage. Your father would be proud." The words brought unexpected tears to Olivia's eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." 2 weeks passed relatively peacefully. Wainwright's men did not return, and Olivia began to hope that perhaps their preparations and Austin's presence had convinced them to back off. But she should have known better. It was a cold November morning when Olivia woke to the sound of cattle bellowing in distress. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside to find Austin already standing in the yard, staring toward the northern pasture. "They have cut the fence and are driving off the herd," he said grimly. Olivia's stomach clenched. Without her cattle, the ranch was worthless. She would have no income, no way to pay debts or buy supplies. Wainwright was not trying to scare her anymore. He was trying to destroy her completely. "We have to stop them," she said. "There are at least 6 riders," Austin said. "Maybe more. The odds are not good." "I do not care about the odds. Those are my cattle." Austin looked at her, and something in his expression changed. He smiled, a reckless, determined smile. "All right then. Let us go get your cattle back." They saddled their horses in record time and rode hard toward the northern pasture. As they crested a low rise, Olivia could see the riders pushing her cattle toward the boundary of Wainwright's property. She recognized Dalton in the lead, along with 5 other men. "We need a plan," Austin said. "If we just charge in, they will gun us down." Olivia's mind raced. Then she remembered the terrain ahead. "There is a narrow draw about half a mile from here where the trail passes between 2 rocky outcroppings. If we can get ahead of them, we can use the high ground to our advantage." "Can we make it in time?" "If we cut across the eastern ridge, yes, but we will have to ride fast." They pushed their horses into a gallop, racing across the uneven ground. Olivia's heart pounded as Rosie stretched out beneath her, powerful and sure-footed. Austin kept pace beside her on his buckskin, the 2 of them moving in unison like they had been riding together for years instead of weeks. They reached the draw just ahead of the cattle and riders. Austin and Olivia dismounted quickly, tying their horses back out of sight, and took positions among the rocks on either side of the narrow passage. Olivia's hands were steady now, all fear burned away by righteous anger. The sound of hooves and bellowing cattle grew louder, and then the herd came into view, being pushed through the draw by Dalton and his men. Austin caught Olivia's eye and nodded. She raised her rifle and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed off the rocks, and the cattle spooked, milling in confusion. The riders pulled up short, looking around frantically for the source of the shot. "That is far enough," Austin called out, his voice carrying clearly. "Turn those cattle around and head back the way you came." Dalton spotted them among the rocks, and his face twisted with rage. "Keller, I should have known you would stick your nose in where it does not belong. And the Connor girl playing cowboy, this is not your fight anymore, Keller. Ride away now and we will forget you were here." "Afraid I cannot do that," Austin said. "These cattle belong to Miss Connor and you are stealing them. That makes it rustling, which is a hanging offense in Texas. So like I said, turn them around." "There are 6 of us and 2 of you," Dalton shouted. "You think you can stop us?" I think we have the high ground. I think we are both good shots, and I think you are going to lose at least 2 men before you can reach us. The question is whether you want to be one of those 2. Because I will tell you right now, I am aiming at you first. Olivia could see the other riders shifting nervously in their saddles. They were hired hands, not gunslingers, and the prospect of getting shot for someone else's cattle was clearly not appealing to them. One man slowly raised his hands. "I did not sign on for this, Dalton," he said. "Wainwright said we were just going to move some strays, not get into a shooting war." "Shut up," Dalton snarled, but another rider was already backing his horse away. "I am with him. This is not worth dying over." Within moments, 4 of the 6 riders had turned and were riding away, leaving only Dalton and one loyal man. Dalton's face was purple with rage. "You have not won anything," he shouted at Olivia and Austin. "Wainwright will not stop. He will burn you out, run you off, or put you in the ground. You are just delaying the inevitable." "Maybe," Austin called back, "but today is not that day. Now get off this land before I decide to put a bullet in you for good measure." Dalton stared at them for a long moment, then finally jerked his horse's head around and rode off, his remaining companion following. Olivia waited until they were out of sight before she lowered her rifle. Her whole body was shaking with adrenaline and relief. "We did it," she said, her voice unsteady. "We actually did it." Austin climbed down from the rocks and walked over to her. "You did it," he said. "That was quick thinking with the draw, and you handled yourself like a true rancher. Your father would have been proud." Olivia looked up at him, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Austin reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "I will fight beside you," he said quietly. "For as long as you need me, I will fight beside you." The words created a warmth in Olivia's chest that had nothing to do with the exertion of the ride. She realized that over the past weeks, Austin had become more than just hired help. He had become her partner, her ally, and something else she was only beginning to recognize. "Thank you," she whispered. They spent the rest of the day driving the cattle back to the northern pasture and repairing the cut fence. By the time they finished, both were exhausted, but there was a sense of triumph in the air. They had stood up to Wainwright's men and won, at least for today. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Austin turned to Olivia. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I was not completely honest with you when we first met." Olivia's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "When I said I was just passing through, that was true. But what I did not tell you was why. I was drifting because I did not have anything worth staying for, anywhere that felt like home. These past weeks, working alongside you, defending this ranch, I have realized something. This place feels more like home than anywhere I have been since my parents died. And you, Olivia, you have reminded me what it means to fight for something that matters." Olivia's breath caught. Austin was looking at her with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I am not good with words," he continued, "but I need you to know that I am not here just because you hired me. I am here because I want to be. Because being near you makes me feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." "Austin," Olivia said softly. "I feel the same way. When you rode into Abilene, I thought I was just looking for someone to help me defend the ranch. But you have become so much more than that. You have become the person I think about when I wake up in the morning and the last person I want to see before I go to sleep. I trust you completely, and I care about you more than I know how to say." Austin reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I want to stay, Olivia, not just until the trouble with Wainwright is over, but permanently. I want to help you build this ranch into something even greater than your father dreamed. I want to be your partner in every way that matters, if you will have me." Olivia felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that too, more than anything." Austin leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle, and Olivia felt like her heart might burst from the happiness flooding through her. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "So what do we do about Wainwright?" Olivia asked practically, even as she continued to hold Austin's hand. "We keep fighting," Austin said. "But we also need to be smart about it. Wainwright has money and power, but those things can work against him too. If we can get proof that he is behind the harassment and the rustling, we can go over the sheriff's head and appeal to the territorial judge. It is a long shot, but it is our best option." Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Austin worked to gather evidence against Wainwright. They documented every incident, spoke quietly to some of the ranch hands who had backed down during the confrontation at the draw, and even managed to get one man to sign a statement admitting that Wainwright had ordered them to drive off Olivia's cattle. But gathering evidence was only part of the challenge. They also had to maintain the ranch, protect the property, and deal with the increasing harassment from Wainwright's men. Fences were cut repeatedly, water troughs were poisoned, and there were several more attempts to start fires. Through it all, Austin and Olivia grew closer. They worked side by side during the day and talked for hours in the evening. Austin taught Olivia tricks for managing cattle that his father had taught him. Olivia shared her father's wisdom about reading the weather and knowing when to plant hay. They laughed together, argued occasionally about the best way to handle a problem, and slowly built a partnership based on mutual respect and deepening love. One evening in early December, as they were finishing dinner, Austin pulled a small carved wooden box from his pocket and set it on the table. "My mother gave this to my father the day they got married," he said. "After they died, it was one of the few things I kept. I want you to have it." Olivia opened the box carefully. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. She looked up at Austin, her eyes wide. "Olivia Connor, I know we have not known each other long, and I know our situation is complicated and dangerous, but I also know that I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Olivia's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you, Austin Keller." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They held each other close, and Olivia felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had not experienced in years. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Abilene. The pastor, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson who had known Olivia's father, performed the service. There were few guests, only Mr. Peterson from the general store and his wife, and a couple of townspeople who had always been kind to Olivia. It was a far cry from the grand wedding Olivia had sometimes imagined as a girl, but standing beside Austin and speaking her vows, she could not imagine anything more perfect. When the ceremony was over and they walked out of the church together as husband and wife, Olivia saw Marcus Wainwright standing across the street, watching. His expression was cold and calculating, and Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. But then Austin's hand tightened around hers, warm and strong, and she lifted her chin and met Wainwright's gaze steadily. She was not alone anymore, and that changed everything. The next few months were difficult but also filled with joy. Winter settled over the Texas plains, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Austin and Olivia worked to keep the cattle fed and watered, repaired damage from storms, and continued to fend off Wainwright's harassment. But they also built a life together. Austin moved his belongings into the ranch house, and they made small changes to turn it from Olivia's childhood home into their shared space. They cooked meals together, read books aloud by the fire in the evenings, and talked about their dreams for the future. In February, they finally had enough evidence to take their case to the territorial judge. Austin rode to San Antonio with all the documentation they had gathered, while Olivia stayed behind to watch the ranch. He was gone for nearly 2 weeks, the longest they had been apart since they met, and Olivia counted every day until his return. When Austin finally rode back into the yard, he was smiling. "The judge listened," he said, pulling Olivia into his arms. "He is sending a federal marshal to investigate." Wainwright's reach does not extend to the territorial government, and the judge was very interested in the signed statements from his men. "There is going to be a full inquiry." Olivia felt weak with relief. "Does this mean it is over?" "Not yet," Austin said, "but it means we have a real chance." The marshal arrived in March, a stern man named William Crawford, who spent 3 weeks interviewing witnesses and examining evidence. Wainwright tried to intimidate people into silence, but several of his own ranch hands, tired of being asked to do illegal work, came forward with testimony. The sheriff tried to interfere, but Crawford had the authority of the federal government behind him and would not be pushed around. In the end, Marshal Crawford filed formal charges against Marcus Wainwright for harassment, attempted theft, and conspiracy to commit arson. The case would go to trial, and even if Wainwright was not convicted, the public scrutiny and legal costs would severely damage his reputation and finances. More importantly, Wainwright seemed to realize he had overplayed his hand. The harassment stopped. His men no longer rode onto Olivia's property, and the threats and intimidation ceased. It was as if a weight had been lifted from the ranch. Spring came, bringing warm winds and new grass. Olivia and Austin worked to rebuild everything that had been damaged over the winter. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men from a neighboring county who were hardworking and honest. The cattle herd thrived, and Olivia was able to sell several head at good prices, bringing in much-needed income. In May, Olivia realized she was pregnant. She told Austin one evening after dinner, and the joy on his face was something she would remember forever. "A baby," he said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Olivia, you have made me the happiest man alive." "Are you ready to be a father?" she asked, smiling. "I have no idea," Austin admitted, "but I am ready to try, and I know you will be an amazing mother." Over the next months, as Olivia's pregnancy progressed, Austin took on more and more of the heavy work around the ranch. He was protective but not overbearing, understanding that Olivia needed to remain active and involved. They prepared one of the spare rooms as a nursery, building a cradle from oak wood and sewing tiny clothes and blankets. In late December, on a cold, clear night, Olivia went into labor. Austin rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Davies, and then paced nervously outside the bedroom while Olivia labored. It was a long, difficult night, but when dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the house. Austin rushed into the room to find Olivia exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny red-faced infant wrapped in blankets. "It is a boy," she said softly, "a healthy, strong boy." Austin knelt beside the bed, looking down at his son with wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Olivia." They named him James after Olivia's father, and he became the center of their world. Austin proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle with the baby. Olivia recovered quickly from the birth, and with the help of the ranch hands, they continued to run the ranch successfully. Wainwright's trial took place that spring, and while he managed to avoid jail time through expensive lawyers and legal maneuvering, he was fined heavily, and his reputation in the county was destroyed. Many of his ranch hands quit, and other ranchers who had been afraid of him began to push back against his attempts to dominate the area. He eventually sold his ranch and moved to Kansas, leaving Texas behind. The years that followed were good ones. Olivia and Austin expanded the ranch, buying adjoining property when it became available and building up their herd. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah, and another son they named Thomas. The ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in Taylor County. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle and learning everything his father could teach him. Sarah was adventurous and fearless, riding before she could barely walk and always getting into mischief. Thomas was the quiet one, more interested in books than ranching, and Austin and Olivia encouraged all their interests. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin and Olivia stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land they had defended and built together. The ranch house had been expanded over the years, with additional rooms for their growing family. The pastures were full of healthy cattle, the barns were solid and well-maintained, and everything spoke of prosperity and care. "You ever think about that day when I rode into Abilene?" Austin asked, his arm around Olivia's waist. "All the time," Olivia said, leaning into him. "I think about how desperate I was, how alone I felt, and how you changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Austin said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, no purpose, no home. You gave me both. You gave me a reason to stay in one place and build something lasting." "We built it together," Olivia corrected gently. "Every fence post, every calf born, every challenge we faced, we did it as partners." "True," Austin agreed. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know that I have never regretted my decision to stay, not for a single moment. These have been the best 10 years of my life, and I look forward to the next 50 years with you." Olivia smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Only 50. I was hoping for at least 60. Austin laughed and pulled her close, kissing her as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Inside the house, they could hear their children playing, their voices full of laughter and life. As they stood together in the gathering dusk, Olivia thought about everything they had overcome. The fear and loneliness she had felt when her father died seemed like a lifetime ago. The threats from Wainwright, the fires and the harassment and the constant worry, all of it had been worth enduring because it had led her to Austin. She thought about that day when she had stood alone with just her rifle and her courage, refusing to surrender what was hers. She had defended her land, yes, but she had also defended her right to choose her own path, to make her own decisions, to be more than what society expected of a woman alone. And when Austin had ridden into her life and said, "I will fight beside you," he had not just offered his strength. He had offered his partnership, his respect, his love. He had seen her not as someone who needed to be rescued, but as someone worth fighting alongside. Together, they had built something remarkable. Not just a successful ranch, but a marriage based on equality and mutual respect. They had created a home filled with love and laughter, raised children who were growing up knowing that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resourcefulness, and harsh winters that tested their endurance. There were good years when the cattle prices were high and the grass was thick, and leaner years when they had to be careful with every penny. Through it all, Austin and Olivia faced everything together. James, their eldest, proved to have his father's natural gift with horses and his mother's head for business. By the time he was 16, he was helping to manage the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Sarah continued to be fearless, and Austin spent many sleepless nights worrying about her tendency to take risks. But she also had a kind heart and a fierce loyalty to her family. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming interested in veterinary medicine, and they supported his dream by sending him to study in Houston. When Olivia was 45 and Austin was 48, they became grandparents for the first time. James married a sweet young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they had a baby girl they named Olivia, after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake in her arms, Olivia felt a sense of completion, a feeling that the circle had been made whole. Austin had gone gray at the temples, and Olivia had lines at the corners of her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But they were still as much in love as they had been on their wedding day. They still worked side by side every day, still talked for hours on the porch in the evenings, still reached for each other in the darkness of their bedroom. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard. James and Catherine's family had grown to include 3 children, and Sarah had also married and had 2 sons. Thomas had returned from his studies and opened a veterinary practice in Abilene, where he lived with his wife and their daughter. "We have been blessed," Olivia said quietly, watching the children chase each other around the oak tree that had stood in the yard since before she was born. "We have," Austin agreed, "more than I ever imagined possible. Do you remember what Wainwright used to say? That I could not hold onto this land, that a woman alone had no chance." Austin smiled. "I remember, but you were never going to let him win. You had too much courage for that." "I had courage," Olivia said, "but I also had you. When you said you would fight beside me, you gave me more than help. You gave me hope." Austin took her hand, the same hand that now wore the simple gold ring he had given her more than 40 years earlier. "And you gave me a home, a family, and a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their legacy play out before them in the form of children and grandchildren who would carry on the ranch they had built together. The land that Olivia had defended with nothing, but courage had become a thriving operation that would support generations to come. The ranch that had nearly been stolen by greed and intimidation had instead become a symbol of what could be accomplished through determination, hard work, and partnership. As the sun set on another day, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Olivia leaned against Austin's shoulder and felt profoundly content. They had faced down enemies and overcome obstacles that would have defeated lesser people. They had built not just a ranch, but a life full of meaning and love. Years later, when Olivia was 71 and Austin was 74, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house, expanded and improved over the decades, was filled to bursting with family. There was music and laughter, good food and storytelling. James stood up to make a toast, raising his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us that courage means standing up for what you believe in. That partnership means respecting each other as equals. And that love means choosing each other every single day. Thank you for showing us what a true marriage looks like, and thank you for building something that will last for generations." Everyone raised their glasses, and Olivia had to wipe away tears. Austin squeezed her hand, his green eyes still as clear and kind as they had been that first day in Abilene. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Austin and Olivia walked out to the porch one last time. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was cool and sweet. 50 years, Olivia said wonderingly. "How did we get here so fast?" One day at a time, Austin said. One challenge at a time, one moment at a time, and I would not change a single second of it. Not even the scary parts, not even those, Austin said firmly. Because the scary parts taught us how strong we could be. They showed us what we were capable of when we stood together. Olivia thought back to that terrified young woman who had faced down Wainwright's men with nothing but a rifle and determination. She thought about the lonely months after her father died, when she had been convinced she would have to surrender everything. She thought about the moment Austin rode into her life, a stranger who became her partner, her husband, her best friend, and the love of her life. "When you told me you would fight beside me," Olivia said softly, "did you have any idea what you were getting yourself into?" Austin laughed. "Not even a little bit, but I knew that you were worth fighting for. I knew that from the moment I saw you standing up to Dalton, refusing to back down even though you were outnumbered and alone. I saw your courage and I wanted to be part of that. And I saw your kindness," Olivia said, "your strength and your honor. I saw a man who would stand up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. I trusted you immediately, which was crazy considering I had just met you, but somehow I knew you were different." "We were meant to find each other," Austin said. "I truly believe that. I was drifting toward Abilene for a reason, and you needed help at exactly the right moment. Some things are just meant to be." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had built an extraordinary life from courage, hard work, and love. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to everything they had accomplished together. Austin and Olivia lived another decade, healthy and active well into their 80s. They watched their grandchildren grow into adults, celebrated the births of great-grandchildren, and continued to be actively involved in the ranch operations as long as their bodies allowed. When Austin finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Olivia mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the incredible life they had shared. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by family, for another 3 years. On a warm spring morning, when Olivia was 84 herself, she sat on the porch in her rocking chair, wrapped in a quilt her granddaughter had made. James sat beside her, now a gray-haired man in his 60s, but still strong and capable. "Tell me again about the day you met Dad," he said, a request he had made many times over the years. Olivia smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "I was at my lowest point," she said. "I thought I was going to lose everything. And then this stranger rode into town, tall and handsome with the kindest eyes I had ever seen. I took a chance and asked him to help me, even though I had no reason to think he would say yes. But he did. He looked at me and said, 'I will fight beside you.' And he kept that promise every day for the rest of his life. He loved you so much," James said. "And I loved him," Olivia said. "More than words could ever express. Your father gave me the greatest gift anyone could give. He gave me partnership, respect, and love without reservation. He saw me as an equal, treated me as a partner, and together we built all of this." She gestured to the ranch, to the land that stretched as far as the eye could see, to the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "This ranch exists because I refused to give up, but it thrived because we worked together. Your father and I were a team in every sense of the word. And that, James, is the real secret. Not courage alone, not strength alone, but partnership. Two people choosing to stand together against whatever comes." James nodded, understanding. He had built his own marriage on the same principles, learning from the example his parents had set. Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She could almost feel Austin sitting beside her, could almost hear his voice saying, "I will fight beside you." She passed away peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried next to Austin on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a oak tree they had planted together on their 20th wedding anniversary. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, a living legacy of two people who had faced impossible odds and won. The story of Olivia and Austin became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that courage, determination, and love could overcome any obstacle. In the small cemetery on the hill, two simple headstones stood side by side. One read Olivia Connor Keller, 1856–1940, she defended her land with courage. The other read Austin James Keller, 1853–1937, he fought beside her. And beneath both, carved into the stone base that supported them, were the words "Together forever." The Wild West had been a time of hardship and struggle, of vast open spaces and dangerous challenges. But it had also been a time when a woman could stand up for her rights, when a man could choose honor over ease, and when two people could find each other against all odds and build something lasting. Olivia and Austin's story became part of Texas history, a reminder that the American West was built not just by rugged individuals, but by partnerships of equals who chose to face the world together. Their descendants continued to ranch the land for generations, each one knowing the story of how it all began, how a young woman defended her land with nothing but courage, how a wandering cowboy rode into town at just the right moment and said, "I will fight beside you," and how together they built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The land itself seemed to remember them, the wind that rustled through the grass carrying echoes of their laughter, their struggles, their triumphs. The ranch house stood solid and strong, expanded over the years but still containing the original 4 rooms that Olivia's father had built with his own hands. Every sunset painted the sky in the same brilliant colors that Olivia and Austin had watched together for 50 years. Every spring brought new calves and new grass, continuing the cycle of life that they had worked so hard to maintain. Every generation that worked the land knew they were part of something bigger than themselves, part of a story of courage and love that had started more than a century before. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done, and the family gathered on the porch as the stars came out, someone would always tell the story again. The story of how Olivia Connor stood alone against impossible odds, how Austin Keller appeared at exactly the right moment, and how they built a life together based on mutual respect, unwavering partnership, and a love that transcended all obstacles. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of what two people could accomplish when they truly stood together, when they defended not just land but each other, when they fought not just for survival but for the right to build the life they wanted on their own terms. And that story, like the land itself, would endure forever.